Hello, thank you for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. I am David Pendergrass. Being a pastor can be overwhelmingly rewarding and fulfilling, but one of the most difficult parts of being a pastor is that you are there when people are in terrible sorrow, and I have experienced that several times in pastoral ministry, and not too long ago, in fact, I was with a family and have been with them since, of course, when they tragically lost their son, a baby who wasn't more than a few months old, precious little boy, and to a precious family, just because of an accident, probably just some things that babies choke up and whatnot. I mean, just everything was fine. The next thing I know, they've lost their child. I mean, he's sleeping finally in the crib, and it's just terribly sad. This family's already been through enough heartache in life. They've been through all kinds of tragedy, and this thing on top of it is just horrible. So it's a very sad thing, and I want to do this podcast today understanding, I hope you understand, and if you don't know me, if you're a skeptic or atheist listening to this, and you don't know me well at all, if you're a faithful listener, then you know me a little more to realize that I come with these podcasts as pastorally as I can. But I want to be very clear off the bat is that the topic of today's podcast is not what I say or what I would say to people who are grieving. It's not. Though I have had theological discussions with people in the grief, I've had very short ones on purpose, and they've asked me sometimes in anger, where is God, and why is he doing this, and what's your answer, and why would he let this happen, and so forth. Those kind of things happen, those kind of demands. But I always say I have an answer, or I'm not going to talk about that, or we'll talk about that later. And here's why. There are two major reasons why I don't talk about theological reasons for loss when you're right in the middle of it. The first one is because humans, can't process it anyway. They can't. When you're in a terrible traumatic experience, the front part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, does start losing blood supply. It starts you might say, kind of shutting down. And you don't think clearly. So the first thing I'd say is it's pretty ineffective. An efficient use of your time. But the main reason why I don't talk about theological explanations for suffering or pain and so forth, or you might say theodicy, is because understanding why doesn't take the grief away during a serious loss. And that's what humans want to do. They want to understand why they're going through it, and the understanding that it makes it okay. And in normal circumstances, that makes sense. In normal circumstances, it just does. In normal circumstances, it makes soften the blow. If I get a ticket, and I demand, why is that? And they go, oh, you parked in a spot and there was a meter. And I go, I didn't see the meter. I go, okay, well, I'm still mad that I got the ticket, but I understand a little more now that I was in a place and it's my fault. But nevertheless, even those little explanations, I'm not happy that I got the ticket, but it helps me understand a little bit, but I'm still mad. But we still want to demand why. We think something's unfair. We want an explanation. So even in my simple, silly analogy of getting a ticket still doesn't take away my grief or anger. It's a billion times worse when a loved one dies, or when you've been in a traumatic event like 9/11 or something. When you're in a terrible trauma, what you do not need are intellectual explanations. Again, one more time, why is that? Because understanding why doesn't take away the loss. It doesn't take away the loss. And that's one of the most common misunderstandings I meet with people that I've counseled for almost 20 years in ministry, is that they keep wanting to demand an answer from God before they will grieve. And that's why they can't move on with life. That's why they stay in depression. That's why they stay addicted. And that's why they can't move on and have a joyful life, because they're still wanting to hear the why from God before they move on. So what I'm going to say today's podcast is not what I say to a person in the middle of the loss. I do not, because they cannot process it, and two, it doesn't make them feel better, and it's not the time for it. Nevertheless, so I'll be very clear about that. If you don't understand that right at the beginning, I'm sorry I'm belaboring the point, because right now, well, for two reasons. One is because You might think I'm being so insensitive by saying what I'm going to say today, but I'm not trying it, and I'm not being insensitive, because this is not a podcast for people who are hurting. And my second reason why I'm telling you this intro and belaboring the point is because if you are hurting, if you are in the middle of the grief of losing a child or a loved one, and you're waiting for this podcast to make you feel better, I'm not sure this is the podcast for you. Maybe it helps you. Maybe it makes you more mad. I don't know. I hope it doesn't make you more mad. But nevertheless, a podcast won't take away your need to grieve. Period. So, okay, that's it. Maybe this last little quick reflection before I move on, and that is, people like Tom Wright, who's N.T. Wright, a world-renowned New Testament scholar and theologian. I respect him a lot. He talks about when people go through suffering and traumatic loss that it's not, I'm paraphrasing here, basically it's not even worth talking about because in some way it vitiates the pain. It makes the pain not as big a deal because you're giving an explanation for it. I kind of understand where he's coming from, but I just disagree with him. I think it's okay to talk about these things just depending on the situation. And right now, I'm not talking to a person who's in the midst of grief. I'm talking about the British might say, a cool moment. So let's think about this for a moment. Why do babies die? Babies die because humans are not immortal. Humans are not immortal. That's the answer. Humans don't live forever on Earth. That's why humans die. Now, death is God's punishment on humans. Now, this is a huge topic, but just to make it simple as I can, in the New Testament, there are two primary ways death is used. There's what you might call spiritual death, the death of our relationship with God, and then there's a literal physical death. Oftentimes, when death is used in the New Testament, it means a sense of spiritual death, but sometimes it means both, or maybe more the physical. And you see such explanations like in Romans 5:12. Just as sin came into the world through one man, he means Adam, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. Because all sinned. We see this idea throughout the New Testament that all the way back, of course, it's based on Genesis, Adam and Eve, who were basically kicked out of the garden for their own protection because God didn't want people on earth to be living immortal lives in sinfulness. That's not what he wanted. And a classic verse to go to as well in the section of Hebrews chapter 9. In Hebrews 9, the author is speaking how Jesus did not go back into the heavenly temple, as it were, over and over and over to offer sacrifices. In fact, he went into the heavenly sanctuary, you might say, once and for all. And he says in verse 25, and he did not enter to offer himself again and again, the way the high priest enters the sanctuary year after year with blood that is not his own. For then he would have had to suffer again and again since the foundation of the world. But now he has appeared once for all the consummation of the ages, to put away sin by his sacrifice. Verse 27, and just as people are appointed to die once and then to face judgment, so also after Christ was offered once to bear the sins of many, to those who eagerly wait him, he will appear a second time, not to bear sin, but to bring salvation. In that context, of course, the author is talking about Jesus having died once. We too will die once. We see a basic concept in the New Testament that humans are not immortal. They're not. They're not on earth. The soul is not supposed to live forever either. That's Plato thought that. But in the Jewish and Christian worldview, the soul, the part of us that is the self with the body, if it lives on because God wishes that. So death on this earth is appointed by God. We are not to live forever on earth. So why do babies die? Because humans die. Humans are not immortal. Is that what really offends you? That humans aren't immortal? I mean, I've asked this before, and I can't get a good answer by skeptics and atheists alike. Is that what really offends people, that humans don't live forever, that we're not Superman or something? In my experience, that's not true. People aren't really offended by that. Yet, nevertheless, that's what people talk about the most. And that's what we're really mad about Why are people dying? Well, we're not immortal. No one gets really mad about that. Well, no, David, it's because humans were young. It was a baby. And because the human was a baby, that's what's so problematic. That's what's so morally offensive. My question is, how many days or years is God supposed to guarantee I live before God's done nothing wrong? A year? A year? If a person lives to be a year old, then that's fine. As long as God guarantees a baby lives past a year. What about, is it 2 years? Why is it 2 years? Why not go to toddler age? Is it 5 years old, 6, 20, 30, 40 years old? And why? Why is that? How many days or years is God supposed to guarantee I live before God's done nothing wrong, nothing immoral, nothing that's problematic? I don't know what would make a person happy. I'm really asking the question. I don't know what it is. And you say, well, David, a long life. A long life. A long life is absolutely culturally dependent. Right now, in 2018, as I do this podcast, is almost 2019, around the globe, life expectancy is quite desperate. It depends on where you live. It depends on the country. If you look at the statistics on one website, the USA, average female life expectancy in the USA is 81. For the male, it's 76. In Canada, the female is 84 and the male is 80. So Canadians on average live longer, 3 years longer if you're a female and 4 years longer if you're a male. Does that offend you? Are you mad? Do you get angry at God because they get to live 3 or 4 more years on average? Should God make sure the Canadians win or the U.S.? What about the Asians who live a lot longer? In the ancient world, it's worse. In the ancient world, the average expectancy was probably around in the 40s in general in the time of Jesus. If you got into the 50s and 60s, you were old. I mean, it could happen. It could happen. Most people didn't live that long. They just didn't. See, we've confused what is average life expectancy with a moral duty of God to make sure I live that long. Now, this is absolute nonsense. It's nonsense. Average life expectancy changes on the region, the time, the culture, the health of the person, everything. And because we get accustomed to that number, the average life expectancy, we then project that upon God and say, God, whatever the average life expectancy is, you owe it to us humans to make sure we live at least that long. And if that's not what you mean, then what is it? How many years or days is it before all of a sudden God is not a villain because he didn't make sure you live that long or your loved one lived that long? Moreover, why is it most other cultures in the world, besides the Western world, especially in the ancient world, where death was just considered part of life? Why is it? Why is it we're so offended, but most people in the ancient world, particularly, and other parts of the world today, they're not offended at all? In the ancient world, when you look at Christians and Jews particularly, let's just leave them for a second. In the ancient world, where's the moral outrage at God? If you don't know, the answer is it's not there. You're hard-pressed to find any texts that are outraged that infant mortality rate in the ancient world was staggering compared to now. Babies died left and right in the ancient world. Mothers died during childbirth. What we don't have are mass, huge apostasies, whole groups of Christians abandoning the faith because their baby died. They had many more people die young for centuries. It's a very modern problem, a very modern complaint that God owes it to us to live a long life. What moral obligation has God not fulfilled by not making sure you live a long life? Where does that obligation come from? To whom is God reporting? Where does God get moral obligations? What other greater being is telling God what to do? Well, the answer is, in Christianity, nothing. No one. If you think God is breaking a moral code, then you don't understand the typical Orthodox understanding of God and any kind of Christian theism, and that is, he is the absolute center of morality. God is not reporting to anyone or anything else. The only way for God to be compelled to obey a moral obligation is if he were to command it himself. So what moral code, what moral regulation is God not honoring by not making sure our babies live forever or a long life. What moral law? What moral code? Where does it come from? It's like saying God broke the speed limit. Well, who tells God how fast he should travel? Where does that come from? Who designed that law, and then why in the world would God be morally obligated to obey it? God has no moral obligations from anything outside of his own character. And if God has not commanded himself to make sure our babies live to the age of 2 or whatever, then he is breaking no moral law. He has no moral obligation, period, to make sure that us humans live for a long time. Everyone knows that people have different moral obligations. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that. No one gets mad about that. I do not expect my neighbors to take care of my children. They do not have that moral obligation. My neighbors on one side have, I think, 3 or 4 little kids. They don't expect me to raise their children. I am under no moral obligation to raise their children. And they're precious little kids, precious. But it's still not my moral job to make sure they're safe and fed and healthy and live a long life. Now, why is that? Because I'm not in the office of parent. It's not my moral obligation to make sure that's the case. Now, the point is, and I can go down a long list of any kind of analogy you want, we all know that moral obligations differ. They differ depending on the person, the office, the role in life, the role in the job, the role in the subway or the car, the truck, at work, at home. Moral obligations are different depending on the situation of the person all the time. It is exactly like that with God. It is exactly like that. God has different moral obligations than you and I do. Just because you might have a moral obligation doesn't mean your neighbor has the same moral obligation. And Lord knows it doesn't mean God has the same moral obligation. God has designed the universe, at least the one we know, the part of it we know on earth, so that humans are held morally responsible for how we treat other humans. And even that is divvied up to various offices, like I just gave an analogy of raising children. But that's what God has designed for us. We have those moral commandments. God is under the moral commandment to make sure certain things happen. God is not morally responsible for making sure my children eat. God is not to blame if my children starve. It's not God's job to make sure my children have food today. It's my job to make sure my kids have food today. If my kids die of starvation, I go to court. Me and my wife would go to jail because of child negligence. It's our job. They don't take my neighbors to jail. And it would be stupid to think you would take God to jail for not raising my children. It's my job to do that. God is not morally obligated to make sure my children eat. God is not morally obligated to make sure babies live. That's not his job. If he wants to do that, he can. But everybody knows everyone has different moral obligations. And what makes people so angry, in my experience and in meeting people and conversations and in written and in podcasts and what I've heard, is the expectation that God is morally responsible to make sure we live long, prosperous lives. And that's a false expectation. In the Christian worldview, it's false. You might need to find another religion, but it's not true in Christianity. Hey, let me take a quick break. Please listen carefully to these quick announcements. I'll be right back.
Do you know of any skeptics in your family, at work, or among your friends? Do you struggle with questions concerning the existence of God or the truth claims of Christianity? Has a skeptic ever challenged you with a difficult question concerning your faith? Then you need to buy Dr. Pendergrass's book, A Skeptic Challenges a Christian, on Amazon.com. You can get it in paperback or on Kindle or in audiobook form to listen to. A Skeptic Challenges a Christian is written unlike any other book. It's not boring and full of technical jargon. It reads like you're sitting down having a conversation. As one reviewer said, as a college student, I absolutely love this book. Dr. Pendergrass knows how to effectively answer a lot of the questions that my friends at school ask about my faith. This book is a great resource for theological debates and for my own personal growth. The arguments are clear and understandable. I would definitely recommend this book to anyone who has questions about Christianity, wants to learn how to defend their faith, or even just wants a good read. Great book. Find out why it has a perfect 5-star rating on Amazon.com. A Skeptic Challenges a Christian. Buy your copies today. Ever wonder what God wants you to do with your money? Should I give it all away or save? What did the early church do with their money? In Dr. Pendergrass's book, Give It Away, Reflections on How Christians Use Money, you'll get 4 short, powerful lessons on what to do with money based on some key texts from the New Testament. This is a wonderful guide for study and reflection. It even comes with reflection questions that are perfect for small group discussions. Give It Away, Reflections on How Christians Use Money. Buy your copies today on Amazon.com. Do you like receiving a glimpse of the kingdom for free? Would you like to support what God is doing through these resources? Then please consider donating to David Pendergrass Ministries, Inc. today at davidpendergrass.com. There, you can also sign up to receive Dr. Pendergrass's free blog on a wide range of theological, biblical, and relationship issues. That's davidpendergrass.com.
Thank you for listening. Let's pick back up where we left off. The bottom line is, our lives are not our own. That's the bottom line. Our lives are not our own. If I lent you my truck, I have a pickup truck, as all Christians do, and that's just a joke. If I lent you my truck, I could, at any time I wish, demand my truck back. At any time I wanted to. It's my truck. Now, you could pretend the truck is yours. You could act like you fashioned the truck and that you're responsible for its existence, but that would be nonsense. The truck is mine. It's mine. See, that's the problem. You don't own your life. God does. It was never yours in the first place. It was never mine in the first place. Before we come to Jesus, we are all rebels driving around in God's truck doing horrible things with it. We think it's ours. We abuse it. This is why it is absolutely best to consider Jesus' demands as logical and reasonable. If you want to be his disciple, you have to deny yourself. Pick up your cross and follow him. You have to give up the truck. It's not yours. When you lose your life, you save it. It wasn't yours in the first place. We think it is. We think God owes it to us. He owes us the obligation to pretend like the truck we're driving around is ours, but it's not. It's not. Our lives are his. And at any time, any way, ever that he wants to, he can take the truck back. He cares what we do in his truck. It's his. So why do babies die? Because humans are not immortal. Why doesn't God guarantee that humans live a long life? Because he has no moral duty to do so. But who does God think he is? He's the designer and owner of your life. That's who he is. He owns you. You don't own yourself. You're either a rebel, living a delusional existence, driving around thinking that truck is yours, you can do what you want to with it. You're delusional. Or you have a firm grasp of reality and understand that you don't own your life, and your life was never meant to be used for your own wishes. Ever. It was never meant to be used for your own wishes. It was never yours in the first place. Yeah, David, but I wanted my baby to live a long life. Me too. Me too. We all do. Any rational, sane, healthy, normal human being wants their babies to grow up and live long lives. Everybody wants that, and we should want that. That's a good thing. And the proper response to losing loved ones, including babies, is grief. Is grief. But my hope is that you and I can really encourage one another or remind ourselves that God is not a villain and he's not absent and it's not worth losing your faith over. Our lives are gifts. They're gifts. We didn't earn it. We didn't ask to be brought to existence. And at any time God wants, the truck can go back home. And remember, in the Christian worldview, dying is moving locations. It's changing an address. That's what that is, including babies. God has the right to move us when he wants. Or do something miraculous to where we do keep living for a while. But nevertheless, whether it's 6-month-old, a 60-year-old, or a 120-year-old, whatever it might be, at no time, ever is our life our own. And to end with something that I actually told the father who lost the baby, I said several things, but one of the things I said was, your son is alive and well right now in the presence of Jesus, and you will see him again. That is the Christian hope. That is the Christian reality. Those are the facts of existence. Those babies are alive and well in the heavenly realm. To such belong the kingdom of God. The heavenly realm is full of all kinds of races and nationalities and age groups. Full. Laughing, playing, having the best conceivable experience. He has not abandoned our babies. He has not let them go. They are living the dream, and you will see them again. Amen. Well, the conversation isn't finished. You can always reach out to me on social media. Are you on Facebook? I am too. At Glimpse of the Kingdom. Glimpse of the Kingdom on Facebook. Be sure to like it and you can see updates there. Also, if you're on Twitter, check me out at Dr. D. Pendergrass, at Dr. D. Pendergrass, or at Glimpse the King, at Glimpse the King. And I try my best to respond to comments and questions on there as quickly as I can. If you want more, there are many more resources on the podcast and my blog. Go to my website, davidpendergrass.com, davidpendergrass.com, and you can see a full list of the podcast, and my blog is available for free. Are you active in a church right now? I'd be happy to come out to your church and do all kinds of classes and workshops there. Check out davidpendergrassconsulting.com, davidpendergrassconsulting.com for more information. And may God in His great grace give you even just a glimpse of His kingdom this week. See you next time.